Today is a good day for Mac owners because we finally got a more affordable version of what was, up until recently, one of the only 5K resolution monitors available, Apple's $1599 Studio display. But is this brand new monitor, the ASUS ProArt PA27JCV, actually good, or is it just a cheap knockoff with several big deal breakers? Also, quick disclaimer, this review is not sponsored by ASUS in any way, and they're also not paying me any money either. It's entirely my own experience and opinion. Okay, first of all, why is a 5K resolution important when using Macs? Well, it has everything to do with the way macOS scales itself. You know, when you jump into system settings and then display and select how big or small you want text and UI elements to appear. macOS can only scale itself up or down by a factor of 2, so on a 4K monitor, for example, you can set the scaling to 1080p. If you look at the actual resolution of 4K, which is 3840 horizontal pixels by 2160 vertical pixels, you'll notice that if you divide it by 2, it perfectly equals the resolution of 1080p, which is 1920 by 1080. So no worries, right? Well, the problem is that 1080p scaling is unusable. It just makes everything on the screen huge. Okay, well, just change the scaling to 4K. Problem solved, right? Wrong again. Now everything is super small. So what you end up doing is selecting the middle option, 1440p scaling, and it's now much better. But look what happens when I divide 2160 by 1440. That doesn't equal 2 anymore, it's 1.5. And this is where the issue is. macOS cannot scale by a factor of 1.5. So what happens is that font and UI elements, for example, will appear ever so slightly blurry and more pixelated than what they should be. 5K does not have this issue because you can divide it evenly by 2. Also, even if there wasn't an issue with 4K scaling on macOS, 5K is still 77% more pixels than 4K. So you're getting that retina pixel density of 218 pixels per inch on a 27-inch monitor, where if you sit the appropriate distance away from the screen, you actually can't see any individual pixels any longer. Kind of like the Retina display on your MacBook. But did I actually notice the difference between a 4K monitor and a 5K monitor? Yes, I mean the text and UI elements are a little sharper, and I certainly noticed slightly less pixelation overall. But controversial opinion, it's not a night and day difference, right? Particularly when you're sitting the appropriate amount of distance away from the screen. I mean, sometimes I really had to squint and move my head a bit closer to notice. Do I prefer 5K? Of course. But you know, if I already had a really good quality 4K monitor, I probably wouldn't feel the need to upgrade just for the 5K resolution alone, unless, you know, I was really picky about my font displaying perfectly, or I was a graphics designer, for example, who needs pixel density on their projects. So now that you know why 5K is such a big deal for Macs, let's take a look at the rest of the monitor. In terms of the design, I think it's kind of ugly. Like, it's made of black plastic. The front bezel is made from a kind of faux metallic material. It's also got a really big logo, and it's quite thick to make room for all of the menu and navigation buttons in the right corner. To be fair, this is quite functional though, because those buttons function as shortcuts, so you can quickly switch between color profiles or input and change brightness, for example. But overall, yeah, it's not winning any design awards, especially if you compare it to the monitor I was previously using with my MacBook, the Dell Ultra Sharp range. But I get it, you know, ASUS has to compromise somewhere to keep the cost of this monitor down. After all, you're buying it for the 5K resolution display, not as a fashion statement. Moving on, the stand is basic but functional. There's height adjustment, swivel, tilt, and portrait mode. But like you've seen in the B-roll of this video, it's usually better to just use the VESA mount on the back with a monitor arm. I'll link the one I'm using in the description below. Side note, the PA27JCV has a built-in power supply, so there's no big power brick required, just a power cable. Speaking of power, if you want to extend the battery life of your smartphone or MacBook, EcoFlow's new Rapid magnetic power bank is a great option, and big thanks to EcoFlow for supporting my work on this channel and sponsoring this section of the video. Now, I'm currently traveling, and the Rapid allows me to charge my iPhone at 15 watts watts via MagSafe with a built-in kickstand, or 30 watts via the built-in USB-C cable. It's really fast too. My iPhone 15 Pro went from 0% to 50% in just 42 minutes using the cable. And yes, it charges MacBooks and iPads too. Also, if I want to charge multiple devices at once, I can with the Qi 2 certified wireless charging. For example, 2 phones at the same time, or even my AirPods and a phone simultaneously. The Rapid uses EcoFlow patented Extreme technology for flagship smartphone level energy density and fast charging capability to balance the compact size and power, charging from 0% to 70% in just 33 minutes. You can also pair it with EcoFlow's Rapid 30-watt GAN charger for an ultra-compact and portable charging setup. So click the link in the description to check out EcoFlow's Rapid Magnetic Power Bank and 30-watt GAN charger today. Moving on to ports, the PA27JCV is primarily designed to be used with laptops, and it's essentially a 2-in-1 device, a monitor and a desktop dock. It comes with the usual DisplayPort and HDMI inputs, but you'll ideally use the included USB-C cable to connect your laptop to the monitor, provide up to 96 watts of charging, output an image to the screen, and also gives you access to any devices connected to the monitor via the port selection on the back. Now the port selection is okay. You can plug a few USB devices into the back. I have my USB microphone, mouse dongle, and Kanto U4 speakers attached there, and there's 2 front quick access ports for additional connectivity, or charging devices like an iPhone, for example. But this monitor does not use Thunderbolt technology, unlike some other monitors in this space. So all of these ports are only USB 3.2 Gen 1 speed, which caps out at 5 gigabits per second. But overall, yeah, while it's no comparison to the Apple Studio Display or the Dell U2724DE, for example, with a full-on dock built into it, it gets the job done and it works well. It also has an Auto-KVM Switch built in, and I really love seeing this feature in monitors because if you're like me and you have a dual Mac and PC setup, for example, you can just quickly switch between the 2 computers using the input shortcut on the front bezel. As soon as you change the display input using this shortcut button, everything plugged into the ports on the back, like a mouse or a keyboard, for example, automatically connects to whatever computer you're currently using. There's no need to fiddle around unplugging devices or switching everything over manually. And yes, if you're wondering, the 5K resolution works fine on Windows computers. The menu system is basic but functional. There's a joystick on the right for navigation and 5 shortcut buttons. These 2 can be customized. I have mine set to color presets so I can easily switch between them, and the other is for adjusting the brightness. Now, speaking of brightness, for Mac users, here's a tip that is a little bit of a game changer for you, and if you like it, promise me you'll hit that subscribe button. Instead of stuffing around with that joystick to change brightness every time, there's a free app you can download called MonitorControl, and it lets you directly adjust the brightness of the ProArt monitor from your Mac without having to manually change the monitor. It even works with the brightness keyboard shortcuts. Told you it was a game changer, so just hit that subscribe button already so I can give you more tips and tricks in the future. So let's talk about the panel this monitor uses. It's not using any fancy new tech, it's just the same IPS technology, 10-bit color, and similar contrast ratio that we've seen before. And aside from the 5K resolution, probably the next biggest selling factor is the color accuracy. It's very good, with 99% of DCI-P3, 100% of sRGB, and 95% of Adobe RGB. Almost exactly the same as the Apple Studio Display. Unlike the Studio Display though, ASUS also factory calibrates each individual panel to the Kalman verified standard, and you get a piece of paper in the box showing the results for your individual display. Side by side with my MacBook Pro and Apple Studio Display, and in matching color modes, I honestly couldn't tell the difference apart from the matte display on the ProArt. Now, ASUS calls this their Lux Pixel technology. It's a fancy name for an anti-glare, low reflection, or AGLR surface, but it's been done really well in my opinion. I mean, think of the screen as almost having a very fine paper-like texture, which means reflections and glare are greatly reduced compared to glossy options out there. And I didn't notice significantly reduced sharpness or contrast during darker scenes. Now, as someone who typically prefers glossy panels, I actually found myself preferring this because I like having natural light in my office, and that can cause issues with glossy screens. Unfortunately, unlike the studio display where you can choose between glossy and matte, there's no glossy panel option for the ASUS. Every monitor just comes with their matte screen as standard. Backlight bleed is something all IPS panels suffer from, but I found it was fairly minimal and I didn't really notice it significantly during any dark scenes. Really, the only negative of the screen is the 60Hz refresh rate, especially when using my 120Hz MacBook Pro Motion screen right next to this monitor. It is really noticeable and it can be a little bit jarring, but a high refresh rate 5K resolution monitor doesn't exist yet, and they probably won't for a while, right? And even if they did, they will need a Thunderbolt 5 Mac to handle the huge bandwidth requirements. So if you really need that 120Hz or 144Hz refresh rate, your only options are a 4K or a 1440p resolution monitor. In terms of brightness, while the studio display is just in a league of its own, the ASUS gets more than bright enough for most situations. And I've never really come close to increasing the brightness all the way to 100%. I usually have it around 45%, which is plenty for me, even during the day. So how does this monitor compare to the Apple Studio display? I do plan on making a whole separate video going into detail and comparing the two, but it's fair to say the studio display is better in almost every way. Build quality, visual design, customization, ports, better speakers, has a webcam, and of course it just works seamlessly with Macs. But you are paying for it. I mean, $15.99 versus $7.99 is a huge difference. And at the end of the day, the primary reason why you're buying either of these monitors is the screen, right? Specifically that 5K resolution. I mean, everything else is secondary. And when you compare their screens, like I said before, there's very little difference, but stay tuned for a full comparison video. Taking a look at other competitors, again, at the time of this video, the ASUS ProArt PA27JCV retails for $799 US. Depending on when you watch this video though, it could even be around the $600 to $700 mark depending on any sales or retailer promotion. So I'll leave a link in the description of all the best up-to-date deals I could find. Now there's also obviously the studio display. Bear in mind that that price only includes the glossy panel and either a VESA only or non-height adjustable stand. If you want the height adjustable stand and nano texture display, yeah, that's gonna cost you. Then there's the Samsung Viewfinity S9, which is Samsung's version of the studio display with 5K resolution, Thunderbolt, and built-in webcam. Reviews are a bit mixed though. Some people love it, but others have issues or just overall dislike the monitor. Then you of course have the typical, 4K USB-C monitors that have been really popular, like the U2723QE from Dell. Much better port selection on the back, but similar color accuracy and build quality as the ASUS. But of course, it's a 4K resolution panel. Overall though, I thoroughly recommend the PA27JCV, despite the awful name. I've been really enjoying using it over the last few weeks, and in fact, I edited this very video on it, and it was kind of amazing how identical the colors were to my Liquid XDR Retina display on my MacBook that was just off to the side. That being said, if you have the money, I still think the studio display is overall a better monitor, but for those of you not wanting to sell a kidney to afford it, the ASUS has essentially the same 5K resolution and super color accurate panel. And yeah, look, the rest of the monitor isn't exactly revolutionary, but it's still functional and works well, and when you combine that with the exceptional panel and the much more affordable price point over the studio display, for a Mac user wanting that crispy 5K resolution, it's a very tempting purchase.